But my wife and I both came from broken homes, and we both, before we got married, and it wasn't something that we discussed with one another per se, but we both knew prior to marriage, we said, if we're going to get married, that's it. We just
Right.
we decided that marriage is one and done, and it doesn't matter if there's rough edges, then we work through them. But that's simply the way it's going to be, and that has served very, very well. So,
Well, I can tell you, this is something that for me, and I'm glad we're talking about it because most of the time when I get interviewed on this book, this is one of those chapters that people don't really think, to ask much about. But I'll tell you that it has been important to me. My wife and I have been together for 45 years. The first 18, we were not Christians. We were 18 years in before we became Christians. The first 9, we were together, but we weren't married. And we were going to school, going to grad school, lived a very secular life. But I did know this. I did know that I was not going to repeat the mistakes of my parents. And this was the biggest
exactly.
mistake was the family structure. It was terrible. It was not fun growing up in the 60s as with a single mom. It just wasn't. And she was very young. She was 18 when she had me. So here she's 21 with a 3-year-old and on her own. Not a good way to, and I remember what that developed in me because I had no cover. I never felt safe. I never felt like I felt vulnerable all the time with her because she was a young girl with a child and I was growing up with her and didn't have any cover. I'll say this. I've always said that I love marriage way more than I love my wife. Now she benefits from that because I want a certain kind of marriage. And when I do weddings, I always tell the couples, look, you need to love marriage more than you love each other because there'll be days when you can't even stand each other. There'll be days when you want to choke each other. But you know what? If you love marriage, you'll realize, hey, what is the purpose of marriage for us? Like for me, the purpose of marriage is kind of like a Tim Keller, the Meaning of Marriage book that he wrote. It's that I'm married to somebody who I have given permission to help shape me to become the person I want to be. Because without her and the permission I've given her to tell me the truth, I'm not going to become that person. That's why men flourish when we're married. If I could do one thing differently, here's what I would have done. I would have married her way earlier. 2, I would have started having kids way sooner. 3, I would have had way more kids. A
Yeah.
lot of it is because I took on a very secular view of what marriage and children were all about. And if we do that, by the way, if you're likely to walk away from your marriage because the secular view says, hey, this is about you being fulfilled. This is about you finding your true love. This is about all the things, which, by the way, I feel like I experience all those things. I have that kind of marriage. But it's not because I'm aiming at that. It's because I'm aiming at this other thing, that this all comes along with it. So I think part of that is something you can do it. Obviously, you've had people on who talk about this, and I always felt like why should anybody care what this detective thinks about this? But it turns out, a lot of the crimes I'm working are crimes where somebody neglected this very important feature of human flourishing.
Well, not only that, but the statistics on divorces amongst police officers is staggering because it's hard. First of all, it's hard to shut off the authoritative aspect of your position when you come home, right?
That's right.
And,
That's
and
right.
especially highway patrol officers, I think, are the worst. Now,
Well,
seriously, I mean,
let's talk about that for a second because that's so true, right? Well, first of all, we all know, we're all the cops in California know, if you get pulled over by a highway patrol officer, everyone's getting the worst possible ticket, okay? Because there's no talking with highway patrol officers. Now, I say that now just to draw the ire of all highway patrol officers, but we notice this too when we're working with BGA, Billy Graham Association, because we'll have like the first week is coming up in 3 weeks, and we've got 4 couples who are scheduled to come up for marriage resiliency retreat. 2 canceled. 1's getting a divorce. Couldn't even get them up there before they're getting divorced. We always say, hey, I know, look, it's only 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away. Just come. Let's just see what God can do. But I can't even get them up there sometimes. So here's the thing. You're absolutely right that we often, it's a pride issue that separates us. It's that authority issue. Here's the problem with police officers. It's a communication issue often because cops are constantly on a high alert. You're driving around in what we call hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is just this idea that I'm looking for danger and I'm looking for what's going to kill me next. And this hypervigilance is what keeps you alive during the shift. And it turns out that hypervigilance causes a certain kind of adrenaline that makes you a very good communicator. So when you're under that high adrenaline, you can talk. You're a talker. You're talking about everything. You're talking about everything you see, everything that's going on in the car. Now, once you're done with your shift, you suffer a crash on the backside, an adrenaline dump on the backside of hypervigilance. So for the next 8 hours or so, you're not going to be a good communicator. Now, when you go home, your spouse typically wants to communicate, I would
Sure.
guess, right? But
She's been in a drought.
yeah, you're on the other side of the adrenaline dump. It takes about 18 to 24 hours for you to recover from that. And guess what? You're back to work in 10.
Yeah.
This hypervigilant cycle that we never seem to be able to get out in front of makes it harder. We have to be very intentional about the way we try to communicate, because typically we're trying to fight with our biology in that hypervigilant cycle. But anyway, that's another
So
issue.
the other interesting aspect about this, though, marriage and family, is when you have a family, it actually forces you to do the things that we were talking about previously, that you have to be others centric, right? It's
Yes.
the needs of the child. So I remember I was in a position where I was doing a job, kind of doing a lot of additional analyses and data reconstruction stuff, and kind of the boss was kind of taking the credit for it and not me, you know. And I'm like, I'm the new guy here, okay? So I let it slide for a while, and it just was really unsatisfying. But I remember two things happened. It's like, I've got mouths to feed at home. It doesn't matter if I'm unhappy at my job, okay? A job isn't to give me personal fulfillment. A job is to put a roof over my head and feed these kids. You know, I have to do it for that reason. And so this other-centric view, especially when you have more kids, right? When you have when you have one kid, you can kind of custom tailor your life to that child. And okay, we'll move dinner to 6:30 because you have practice, Johnny. If you have, 4 kids like I have, then it's like, hey, it doesn't matter. Yeah, all the others are going to be hungry. We got to serve dinner. You know, no, we can't cook just what you like. We've got to cook something that everybody will.
I used to always say, you don't have kids until you have 2.
Well,
you're not married until you have kids.
Yeah.
And you don't have kids until you have 2. Now, only because I see the same thing you're seeing. But here's what's great about it. The data shows us that marriage, especially in men, produces certain outcomes which are super helpful for flourishing. And one of them is an increased sense of responsibility. As a matter of fact, the data shows that it doesn't even occur at marriage. It occurs at the engagement. Men start to become more responsible the minute they know they're going to be married. So this is why the data does not just favor marriage. It turns out, crazily, it favors early marriage, the very thing that the culture is rejecting.
Right.
So this is why, and look, I get it. This sounds like an old guy who's just howling at the moon, wishing the old days would return. But it's. I actually include one quote from a sociologist who argues that any data to the contrary seems to be politically or motivated by some presuppositional bias. The raw data does favor what marriage does, not just with you and your spouse, but with your kids. So, and I've collected, by the way, this book, if you look at the book, it's designed, so I always put the briefest possible footnotes. There's still 50 pages of footnotes in this book, but there's like another 200 in the PDF file we offer online. Why? Well, because there's so much data. I'm making a lot of claims here. Those claims are supported by data. I just want you to see what the data is in case you're interested.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. Absolutely. By the way, I tell people, 2 kids, then you have you'll always get it's not me. It's not me. So you always have
you become a good investigator.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. But with 3, it's even tougher because then you got to shift from a man defense to a zone defense, and that's always harder to play. That's
I used to always say you have 2 hands when you have 2 kids. You get the 3rd kid, I'm running out of hands here to hold you. So yeah, it's very, very true. Very true.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that, and it is important, and it's more than simply longing for the old days. One of the things that people don't realize, one of the crisis points we're getting to, is because we are in a real downward spiral of replacing ourselves generation from generation.
Yeah, no kidding.
What that means, and we did a whole show talking on this, where you had the 30-year-old women who were balking at the idea of having kids. And this is a big issue. The problem is when those 30-year-olds, yes, they want to travel, they want to be free, they want to live their lives, and maybe they say, quote, maybe I won't be a good mother. I don't know if I'll be a good mother. Well, how do you be a good baseball player? You don't, start off throwing a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. You practice. And how can you practice at being a parent unless you have kids? But that's an aside. The problem is when they hit 65 and some medical issues start to show up, they're not going to be traveling anymore, but they have no children. which means that there are fewer people to provide the services to them that they need.
Yeah.
Not only their
Yeah.
family, but there are just simply fewer doctors in the world. So waiting times get longer. Procedures get more expensive, harder to get into the doctor, harder to have a tax base to support your Social Security. We saw in COVID how tragically so many neighbors said something's going on, and they found out an individual had passed away in their apartment alone, and they were there for 3 weeks. Nobody knew it, right? You obviously run into these kinds of things. And why did nobody know it? Because there was no second generation around. And this is what you're dooming yourself to. People don't realize how important this generational crash really is going to be, how it's going to affect life.
And they've already seen this. For example, the one-child policy. A lot of Asian countries have already experienced this, that population ages, the workforce ages, and you don't have a replacement workforce coming up below them. Suddenly you're panicking and trying to encourage children, but you're not going to miss an entire generation. Governments cannot encourage children fast enough once they realize the problem they've caused. So I think that, look, in the end, that's just one of 15 chapters, but I think it's important for us to realize that I was fascinated by this, Lenny, that there's a generation right now, even in the church, that feels like any advice at all, any comment about how you should live, or you ought to live, is seen as, are you single shaming to argue this? You can't, some people just don't get married. I get it. Or are you victim blaming? If you say that, if she just would have done this, she wouldn't be dead. No, I'm not doing either of those things. But if we're going to say that every piece of advice we give the next generation is in some way to trigger some act of feeling of shame or of blame, then what are Proverbs for? What's the book of Proverbs for? It's just a replete with advice for, don't do this, you knucklehead, because you're going to get this bad result. That's what I think wisdom books do. And so what I'm trying to do here is just to provide some ideas of how you might make some small, this kind of, it's like Jordan Peterson's book, I guess, in that sense, that, hey, there's some things you could do to have a better outcome. And we have to be, as a church, we have to embrace this approach, because all of Scripture is really, if you think about it, here's some things you could do to have a better spiritual outcome, right? This is Paul saying to the church, what are you doing? This is the letters. This is Proverbs. This is Scripture. Even Jesus is going to tell people, you ought not live that way. When he says that the last will be first and the first will be last, it's certainly a claim about just the nature of reality. Yeah. But it's also a call on us to stop putting yourself first. So it's both of those things, and that's what I'm trying to do in this book.